Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside with me today. Today I'd like to address a question that I get asked a bunch, and that's why I chose to shoot fixed blade broadheads over mechanical broadheads when there are so fewer tuning issues with mechanical broadheads, and it seems to be that's where the market is heading. More and more advanced mechanical options, thicker blades, thicker ferrules, they're getting better and better, but yet some of us still choose to stick with the old tried and true fixed blade broadhead. So I'd like to go over why I choose fixed blades, not necessarily magnets, which are my personal favorite, but why I choose fixed blade broadheads in general, cut on contact fixed blade broadheads to be even more specific, and have gone with those over mechanical broadheads. So people will come into the shop where I work or ask me personally through a Facebook message or an email and say, why should I shoot fixed blade broadheads? Or even worse, which one should I shoot, mechanical or fixed blade? And I always push people towards fixed blade. And not because, well, I'm a fixed blade guy or I think they're superiorly better or something like that. It's because of the old meat cutting analogy that I give to everyone. So stick with me for a second, but if you go into your kitchen and you pull a knife out of your knife block, your butcher block, and you need to cut a steak, let's say, or a chicken breast or something like that, you're not going to want to take a knife out, push it into the steak, and then have the blade of the knife deploy and then start cutting the steak, right? Now, you're going to want a knife that comes out of the block and then you can immediately start cutting the steak. That's what a fixed blade broadhead is to a mechanical broadhead. Mechanical broadhead, the blades are hidden. They have to be pushed first into the meat, into the hide, into the bones, and then they deploy, whereas a steak knife, or a fixed blade broadhead in this case, goes right into the animal and the blades are open and cutting from the moment it leaves the bow. Plus also, I follow Murphy's Law. If something's going to go wrong, it will. And with a mechanical broadhead, the blades could not deploy, a screw could come loose, it could come open inside your quiver, it could come open on the way to the animal, maybe it doesn't deploy correctly. And I'm not saying that happens all the time or even a large majority of the time, but it can happen. Whereas a fixed blade, that's never going to happen because the blades are always open 100% of the time. The second thing that I like about fixed blade broadheads is that you can build them beefier than you can mechanical broadheads. With mechanical broadheads shifting to larger and larger cutting diameters, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, even over 2 inches, you have to have a longer and longer ferrule in order to hide the blades. So let's take this Rage broadhead for example. This is 125 grain, this is a crossbow broadhead, and you notice that the blades are very long. This comes open and cuts out to 2 inches. I think it's either 1 3/4 or 2 inches. In order to hide these long blades, this ferrule has to be really long, so when these blades are in their cocked position, they're completely hidden, or at least mostly hidden within the ferrule. Now, there are certain fixed blade broadheads, such as this Rocket Steelhead here, which is really, really tiny. This is a 3-blade over-the-top mechanical. It is only 1 1/8 inch cut, which I think is really nice. It comes in, it penetrates, and then these blades deploy, push this rubber band out of the way, and of course you would push it all the way out of the way, and these blades would be swept back. I think this is a much better mechanical design. The biggest reason being is that the ferrule is so short. Let's take an illustration of these two kitchen knives, for example. Now let's ignore this one is serrated. That's not the purpose of this illustration. The purpose is rather the blade length and the overall weight of these knives because of their blade length. Now the spine, they're exactly the same thickness, right? But because this one is longer, it's easier to flex this blade. And it's meant to be flexed. It's a thinner knife, a filleting, paring knife, if you will. It's meant to be flexed. Whereas the shorter, stouter one, still just as sharp, still just as effective, not as much cutting length, however, it doesn't flex as easily. I have to really push on this in order to get it down. The same thing's true with fixed blade and mechanical blade broadheads. Whether that broadhead has a 2000s blade, kind of like the old style Muzzy, whether you put that over 1.5 inches or 3/4 inch, that'll determine the deflection of that blade as it's trying to pass through an animal. We all know that the longer something is, the easier it bends and the easier it flexes. With a mechanical broadhead, if you're trying to push 1 inch, 1.5 inches, 2 inches in particular, where a lot of mechanical broadheads are headed, unless you make that blade pretty beefy, it's going to flex, and it's going to flex relatively easily. It could bend and it could break a lot easier than a shorter, stouter ferruled, smaller cut broadhead. So I think this Rocket Steelhead, which has about a 30/1000 blade thickness, because it's so stiff and so short and so stout, I think this is a much better design than say something like a Rage or a Schwacker, which has a much longer blade design. Now I also think that if you need to shoot a 2-inch cutting mechanical in order to kill a whitetail because you need that extra large cutting surface, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But that's a different video for a different time. What I'm getting at is the fixed blade broadhead, whether it's a 2, 3, or 4 blade, since the cutting diameter is typically smaller, no more than 1.5 inches usually, those blades have less deflection to them and they're a little bit more rigid, a little bit more stiff. That helps them punch through bone a little bit easier and keeps them more intact as they're trying to pass through the animal. So along with blade length, you also can get blade thickness. Now with a mechanical broadhead, you're trying to push 1.5 inches, sometimes up to 2 inches like we've mentioned. You're trying to push that weight down range. Now that's more blade width and more blade weight, therefore you're getting over 100 grains. So you have to shave off the weight somewhere, either be it a lighter, weaker ferrule or in a thinner, weaker blade. Whereas with a fixed blade broadhead, you can get away with a shorter, beefier ferrule and thicker, shorter blades. So let's take this Magnus buzz cut for example. You have a blade thickness that's 0.59 thousandths, that's the main blade, whereas on like this Rage for example, still 125 grain, you're talking 0.35. So you're almost doubling your blade thickness by going to a fixed blade broadhead. Now if we pull one out of the package, we can obviously see the difference in size. A much shorter ferrule, less potential flex, less potential bend than a longer ferrule. Now this isn't a knock against Rage or Schwacker or Slick Trick or anybody else that makes a long thin ferrule. You have to in order to hide those longer blades. That's not a knock on them as much as it's just strict fact. That's why I prefer a fixed blade broadhead, because you can get away with a shorter, thicker, less likely to bend ferrule than if you use a longer mechanical one. And there are all different types of mechanicals that are the same length or longer. For example, here is an NAP Shockwave. Here you have a Carbon Express Torrid. And the only one that would be comparable, if not shorter, is that Rocket Steelhead, which looks really tiny compared to this Black Hornet. So when I present these facts to people, either in the shop or through an email or something like that, a lot of people then immediately say, well, don't you have to tune those, right? Or those won't fly with my field points, right? Or they better fly with my field points, right? And it kind of grinds my gears a little bit, because it's not the point that it flies with your field tips. Your field tips are going to fly where they're going to fly. They're a completely streamlined thing with the shaft of the arrow. All they are is weight at the front. There's nothing to inhibit their flight except for the fletchings on the back end of the arrow. So really what you're seeing is when your broadheads, if it's a fixed blade or a mechanical, isn't flying with your field points, it means your bow and arrow is out of tune. That's not the broadhead's fault, that's your fault for not tuning your equipment. Now I'm sorry if that stings a little bit, but that's really what it comes down to. If you want to be lazier about it, yeah, you can screw on a mechanical broadhead. I'd say probably 90+% of the time they're going to fly right with your field points. They're made to. They're made to be streamlined, they're made to be easy to sell because they fly with your field tip. Field tip like accuracy, you see it on all the packages. But with a little bit of tuning and a little bit of work on your part, you owe it to the animal that you're trying to shoot. You really do. Whether you're shooting a fixed blade or mechanical, you owe it to the animal and to the hunt in order to make sure that your equipment is tuned properly. How I get my broadheads, whether they're a fixed blade or a mechanical, flying with my field points, I'll put the link to that video down in the description below. It's how I tune every single bow that I get or one that I work on in the shop. If somebody asks, hey, how can I get my broadheads, whether fixed blade or mechanical, to fly with my field points, I show them the video and say, these are the steps that I take. I can shoot 1 1/4 inch Magnus Black Hornet, I can shoot a buzz cut, I can shoot a Bishop Holy Trinity, I can shoot a Bishop Scientific Method, single bevel. It does not matter. If the bow and arrow is tuned, everything should be flying exactly like your field points, because there's nothing to inhibit the arrow for kicking one way or the other, because you should be tuned and the bow should be shooting as efficiently and effectively as possible. So that's why I shoot fixed blades over mechanicals, and I recommend fixed blades to people. It doesn't have to be Magnus, which I'm a personal favorite of. You can shoot Slick Tricks, you can shoot G5 Montex, you can shoot the old 3-blade Muzzies. It does not matter. If your bow and arrow is tuned, it should be flying just fine, grouping really well, and you can take that with 100% confidence into the woods in the fall and arrow that buck of a lifetime. So that's all for this video. If you have any comments, and I can hear them already, please leave them down below in this video. If you have any other questions about archery, archery hunting, the outdoors in general, follow my Instagram, my Facebook. You can even send me an email. It's all down there in the description. If you have any questions about my equipment, it's all listed down there as well. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we'll get to see you next time.